For 20 years, we've been creating innovation in the CX industry, and now we're seeking out brilliant new perspectives on CX you just won't find anywhere else. I'm Richard Owen. Welcome to the CX Iconoclast. Eric Tagliere is Chief Technology Officer at Humana, the fourth largest US health insurance company, which is currently ranked 42 on the Fortune 500 and based out of Kentucky. But Eric's career spans far more than just the health insurance industry, having held similar leadership positions at Marriott, Ameriprise, Experian, and others. That multi-industry background, I think, gives him a unique perspective on the impact of technology and customer experience across industry transformations over time, a perspective he's now bringing to the healthcare industry, arguably the biggest challenge there is in customer excellence. After all, as he says, nobody is indifferent about healthcare. I was particularly struck by two things in our conversation. First, his optimism for the future of healthcare as an industry that's capable of positively transforming the lives of its customers. And second, the tremendous potential for artificial intelligence across the industry, but specifically at a company like Humana. For those of you who are perhaps less familiar with the health insurance industry or see it from an outsider's perspective, I think you'll find his comments both enlightening and also grounds for optimism about the future. So, Eric Tagliere, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And as we just discussed, we had to work a little bit on that pronunciation. So obviously wonderful Italian heritage. And you're explaining that the name comes from where exactly?
It's specifically it's a dish that is prepared in the central region of Italy, usually between Rome and Naples, where it serves different types of antipasto. So growing up, I always kind of felt like this name, just being as ethnic and difficult to pronounce, it was a burden. And as I've grown older and learned to embrace part of my heritage, and when I went to Rome a few years ago for the first time and got to experience it, really come to appreciate the heritage that has been passed down to me.
No kidding. That's wonderful. And so perhaps we could start by just talking a little bit about your career here. So you find yourself, as the CIO at Humana, which is obviously one of the most significant companies in North America. How did you find yourself here? Was this always the plan?
What I would love to say that this was all based on a master plan, but I would be lying if I did say that. I actually did not intend to have a career in technology. When I went through college, I liked math, did not want to pursue pure mathematics because I frankly, really only thought, my option was to go into like academia, which is not what I wanted to do. So I studied more statistics, applied, and really looked at, at that time, UPS, FedEx were really just taking off. And I was really thinking logistics was a really cool, kind of science application of math to business. I went and interned the summer between my junior and senior year and realized, no, that's not really what I want to do. I took a few other courses. I came out actually as an actuarial student. Again, another applied math in business. I started with an insurance company, basically, supporting some of their actuarial lines, came back and said, you know what, I actually like the technology side of this better. So I moved over and kind of fell into this. It's been a very circuitous journey over the past 30 some years. Different industries, different cities, global scope, national, domestic scope. But I always tend to follow where there are really interesting problems to solve. That's why I like statistics, why I studied economics, why I like technology, because with a few basic fundamental understanding of some common rules, you can solve incredibly complex problems. And that just is fascinating.
So thinking about problems to solve, one of the things that's interesting about the industry you're in right now is you live in a massively regulated space. and which in some ways puts a box around the nature of the relationship you're allowed to have with customers. And yet you're providing a service which is incredibly significant, emotionally powerful service, matters a great deal. No one's going to wake up one day and say, yeah, healthcare services, I'm kind of indifferent. I'll take the B team on this, right? So, from a perspective of somebody who's, building, implementing, and making sure these systems exist at scale, what do you see as the challenge that sort of dominates both the industry right now and Humana? How would you characterize that challenge?
So I would say two things. Number one, obviously it is a highly regulated industry, and therefore, as in other regulated industries, you have to be extremely careful. And I think as you think about data privacy and the regulations, I think there's probably no more sacrosanct data than about your own health. And so therefore we do have to treat it with a high degree of urgency around how we think about that, that regulated environment, that sacred relationship between provider and patient. But I also think, again, there's a tremendous amount of opportunity within that trusted relationship to add value. And I see, again, the healthcare industry being at really a pivotal time in their evolution. So, I was, in the financial services industry 20 years ago when, they radically transformed the relationship with their customers. And while some things went better than others, I think everybody feels like they have a more frictionless environment with their financial services provider than they used to. 10 years ago, I was in the travel industry when, digital transformation swept through that. New entrants were coming in, changing, again, the relationship, threatening disintermediation of traditional brands between their customers and how they fulfill services. And how do you basically reestablish that relationship that frankly had, been, moved into too much of a transactional state. I see healthcare right now as being this tremendous opportunity. Now is the right time for this industry to rethink itself, not just from a technology standpoint. Technology is an enabler, but really to rethink how do we become much more customer focused? How do we use technology to do that? How do we deliver insights? How do we connect with people in a frictionless way? How do we make it easier to consume healthcare? How do we make it more accurate? How do we empower doctors, nurses to provide better care and, frankly, spend less time on administrative tasks? Even within a regulated industry, the opportunity is tremendous. And as each and every one of us is a stakeholder in this, everybody here wants better healthcare. There is no question of, should I consume this or should I not? Everybody at some point in their life is going to need high quality healthcare. So everybody, I think, is an active advocate for, yes, we want the system to be better. And we need the large companies, large brands like Humana to help pull the industry forward.
It's been an aspiration for some time, right? There's been false dawns here. I mean, companies as innovative as, well, Amazon and even JP Morgan, right? There's companies from the outside who've said, boy, there's got to be a different way of doing this, and not just to mention industry participants and also governments, multiple efforts to transform the industry using technology. Do you think that circumstances are more favorable today? Are we finally reaching that time? Because clearly this is not easy. If it's easy, people would have solved this problem a long time ago, right? And some of the brightest minds in technology have looked at it, both from a startup and from an incumbent perspective. What gives you optimism that now is the right time? Is it just the desire is more pronounced, or is it that the opportunity is there?
Well, I think there's a few things that are converging, and I think it's been an inevitable convergence. It's more a question of timing, which is, yes, there are, I think there are a number of companies that have tried to enter the space for different reasons. And I think what they found out is it's not purely a technology problem. It's not purely a financial problem. It's not purely a go-to-market problem in terms of should you move from in-person care to telehealth. It's all of the above. And if you approach it from only one vector, you're probably going to miss the mark because ultimately, again, we all have incredibly high standards around what we think is good healthcare. And so I think number one, the technology industry is evolving where a number of problems that used to be really, really hard are now becoming easier. And as we think about, where big data is going, as we think about, the penetration of, mobile apps, as we think about fitness data and health data that's now available in personal trackers, some really, really tough things have become, frankly, now accessible and scalable into the market. I also think, again, consumer expectations have changed. 10 years ago, we all had a certain set of expectations. Today, they're very different. We expect things to happen much faster. We expect it to happen on our terms, not necessarily on the company's terms. I can buy something no matter where I'm at. I could be laying in bed and I can be shopping. I don't need to drive 20 minutes to a store and conduct business on their terms. So I think there's a number of things that are just converging at this time on the enablement side and the demand side that says we're going to make more progress, I think, in the next 5 to 10 years, to your point, than we made in the previous generation.
It's interesting what you say about almost external expectations changing things, right? So, we hear this a lot across every industry. To some extent, the pace is being set by companies that may not be in the same industry at all, but we're starting to calibrate our expectations accordingly. It's interesting that companies like Amazon actually got into the pharmaceutical business directly through purchase. And so sort of bringing pharmaceutical fulfillment into that sort of Amazon model as maybe not the most complex application in the healthcare industry, but nevertheless an example of how revised expectations of how people can purchase and manage product consumption can be updated into the sort of Amazon era of e-commerce. And so those expectations, should get carried over, shouldn't they, into how people not just consume healthcare, but also manage all of those friction elements. Because you started talking about friction as one of the sort of big changes in almost all of these industries.
Mm-hmm.
And this is surely an industry where there's got to be an enormous opportunity to just eliminate complexity and friction from the way customers interact with their healthcare providers and insurance companies.
It is. And, again, there's so many lessons as we look back around the history of commerce that says the consumer has driven most things. There are some rare instances where the producer has created something that the consumer didn't know that they needed. And many people use, Apple and the iPhone in 2007, that as an example of that, of saying most people didn't realize they needed a supercomputer in their pocket, but once they got one, they got hooked on it. But as you look at, again, a lot of the places, and I think again about like, Henry Ford, his approach at, I'm going to go create an affordable car back when most cars were out of reach of most consumers. If you read about the literature at the time, most people thought he was crazy. That people in the middle class didn't want a car, didn't need a car. They lived in cities, they walked to work or they took the train to work. Why would they need to buy a car? He basically, by supplying a latent need, basically took advantage of a market that was there. It was just being underserved. And so the consumers really drove that change because ultimately the Model T sold like crazy and established the Ford Motor Company. I think, again, this is another instance in today's healthcare market where people will gravitate to better solutions. And companies will respond to that. Because the reality is, we all have, this is the product we probably personally care about the most. This is not around, hey, do I take the black car on the lot or the red car? This is my health. This is my happiness. I want the best possible. I think the consumer is going to be a tremendous catalyst for change over, again, the next 5 to 10 years in the industry.
Well, and there's also external factors. So in the broader context, there's been a consolidation within the industry in terms of hospital systems, right? So to some extent, and I'd be interested in your view whether that actually facilitates better automation and IT because we're moving from a less fragmented provision of services system to a much more concentrated one. So that's clearly changing the shape of the industry. We've got an aging population. We've got an increasing, and we've been on a curve for some time, increasing levels of treatment for that aging population, more sophisticated treatments. And then we had this massive disruption through COVID, which was a sort of education for people in terms of use of new technologies, right? Whether it was, working from home or telemedicine, we had whole generations experimenting with technologies that they hadn't previously tried and discovering that, these things were pretty useful. So are these all accelerants, would you say, or do they create headwinds, or are they pushing us all in the same direction?
So I think again, just going back to history to say multiple industries have demonstrated that consolidation makes sense where there are high capital expenditures. It's just more efficient when you get to again a more consolidated rather than a fragmented market structure. When capital investment is required in order for you to provide the best product or service. Now, where industries over consolidate, you see new entrants popping up, new innovation, new disruptors, and they are going and creating underneath it. So I do believe the market dynamics will get us there. Has the healthcare industry been fairly fragmented? Historically, absolutely. So was the financial services industry 25 years ago. I think I went through like 5 banks in a year once,
Right.
where just they kept getting purchased and consolidated. Why? Because frankly, it was a capital intensive business that benefited from scale. But when perhaps there was some over consolidation, you had some startups that came in and said, "I'm going to take care of some underserved markets." So I think the market will drive that effectively. I think your comments on COVID are incredibly appropriate. I think COVID changed us in so many ways. Obviously it changed what we expected in terms of how many people now regularly, if not full time, work from home and have been demonstrated they're fully productive. How many people got comfortable with telehealth in that says, there are times when I need to actually go physically see my doctor. There are times a consultation over video chat is perfectly fine, is more convenient for them, is more convenient for us, is more capital efficient. And therefore, let's go and do that. But I think, again, frankly, from a healthcare industry, we are still reacting and responding to the impacts of COVID on the population. The reality is, obviously, a tremendous amount of people suffered from COVID. Some of that was, again, mortality that happened across the world. Numbers vary. The excess death studies that go on are actually really interesting when you look at it just from a statistical standpoint, as opposed to reported deaths, to say what was really the impact of COVID. But now, again, it's coming out more and more around how COVID has fundamentally shaped our health, right? It's commonly called long COVID, but you get into different people's genetics and biology respond to the virus differently. Some of people are having very long tail symptoms, changing their basic health structures. The healthcare system is still responding to how do we now deal with this. This was not just a 2-year, 2.5 year global pandemic. This actually will probably be a generational or a multi-generational change in how we manage health.
That's interesting, and there's no guarantee that that's the last event of its kind we're going to see in our lifetimes, right? This is, I think that the potential for a pandemic always existed. We'd had near misses with similar novel viruses that originated in similar parts of the world, and I don't think there's great confidence that we wouldn't see a repeat. Arguably, we'd be better equipped to deal with this, having had the experiences from COVID. You would hope that would at least give us a head start in being able to respond. But these kind of black swan events, and back to your experience in the financial services industry, right? What have we learned over the last 30, 40 years? Black swan events are by definition things that may seem improbable but aren't impossible. And in terms of health crisis, we got to be prepared for the possibility that it happens again, I'm sure.
I agree. Obviously, again, the world's much more global than we used to be. Infectious diseases used to be able to be localized. Containment strategies worked because, frankly, people weren't moving. The reality is, COVID spread. I was in the travel industry when it happened. We saw it happening in China right before it hit the U.S. and it spread within a few weeks in terms of what we were seeing. Being a science geek myself, I also look at how the warming of the world is going to impact this. So if you talk, they're talking about as the Siberian permafrost thaws, how many ancient pathogens are trapped in that soil that are going to be released. As you think about, again, I was reading dengue fever, which is obviously considered to be a tropical disease. It's now present consistently in the US. So things that we normally haven't had to deal with. The warming world is going to change all of that, and it's going to have to change the application of medicine.
That's a cheerful thought, dengue in the US. Changing topics for a second, I think, before I get too uncomfortable with the whole idea of ancient pathogens suddenly reemerging. One of the things that's I'm sure Humana is very aware of, very proud of, is it's been consistently scores very high in terms of within the healthcare industry being a leader in customer satisfaction. Now, I mean, I always feel to some extent that can be a double-edged sword, right? On one hand, it's absolutely best to be considered a leader. On the other hand, sometimes the risk is that you simply calibrate amongst your peers and you say, this is great, we're doing really well compared to everyone else in the industry. When, as we've just been discussing, to some extent, customers don't necessarily calibrate industries terribly well. They might say, look, actually, the standard I want to hold everyone to is completely different. It's much, much higher. How do you think about that whole topic? Why is it that Humana has done so well in this category from your perspective? And what do you see as the sort of challenges going forward in terms of satisfying customers?
So, number one, what I would say is I feel, being now at Humana for a few years, fairly confident about this. And the reason I say that is because of the culture within the company. What I can tell people confidently is company is filled with people who care. Every structure, every meeting is built around how are we taking care of our members, how are we taking care of our patients. As a leader in the company, I go through regularly every year experiences with these are different members who have volunteered to share their story, different patients who have volunteered to share their challenges. And I go through that every year to keep connected to the consumer. Again, whether they're part of the insurance part of the equation, whether they're part of our care organization. I've never seen an organization as focused on their mission. I've been part of many organizations that are the mission is important. The mission is top of mind. What I would tell you is Humana lives that mission every single day. It's present. Core of the Humana brand is human. And so that just gets pulled through so often that makes me say, I'm highly confident this is not a company, this is not a culture that is going to sit back and say, we're satisfied. And therefore, we may no longer be leading the industry in it. This is a company, a culture, a team of people who are passionate around delivering the best care possible.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it's a consistent story amongst every company that does prevail in terms of delivering great customer experiences, is that they've somehow managed to engender that into the culture of the company. And it's going to be particularly challenging in the business that's the nature of yours, right? Because to some extent, on one hand, you're in a very high stakes industry. On the other hand, as I said, highly regulated, but also a situation where there's an inherent tension between the nature of the products and services you're able to provide and the desires of customers, right? We're constantly trying to strike a balancing act between cost and service, because that's a trade-off that exists in every industry. But in healthcare, it's particularly difficult trade-off to communicate, because from the consumer's point of view, healthcare is priceless and should be infinite. From a societal point of view, we have to ration resources. We have to put a box around resources. And doesn't that create an inherent challenge in delighting customers? We have to do that within the boundaries of cost and resources.
I think, and this is often something I talk about within my team within technology, which is the different focus between activities and outcomes. Ultimately, the target outcome we have is for people to lead healthier and happier lives. The focus is not consume more healthcare. Now, sometimes consuming more healthcare is directly related to leading healthier and happier lives, but it isn't always the case. And so ultimately, as we think about cost, how I at least think about it is ensuring that we are effectively spending in the right places means that the money that perhaps may have not been spent well actually gets to deliver care to other people. And so I think that there is, a much greater focus on how do we become effective, how do we become more efficient, so that we are essentially delivering the right healthcare at the right time to keep everybody healthy and happy, as opposed to an activity base that says we should measure how many procedures we've had or how many, kind of this or that. I think that quantification becomes a little bit of a challenge. When I think about this really gets into how do we most effectively allocate our resources to maximize the outcome in terms of a society that has greater health, greater longevity, greater happiness. To me, that is a guiding star in terms of how do you think about to manage that? Because every dollar I save in doing one thing means that I'm helping somebody. So how do I become more effective so I can help more people?
Right. So in a world of finite resources, if we can find efficiencies, then we can plow those resources back into creating better outcomes in other parts of the business. Right. At the end of the day, it's the only way, by getting more productive. And with that in mind, and you start to think of technology as an enabler for productivity, obviously we're all abuzz, and you could argue we're in this massive wave of conversation. I say conversation around AI, practical application around AI. When you think about AI as an opportunity for Humana, where do you see that falling?
So, I think number one, this is definitely, you could call it generational change, but the reality, I think the generation is going to be, increasingly quick in terms of what's happening in terms of the progress. And that is largely because this is the first truly digital innovation cycle that I've seen in my 30-some year career. So when you think about the PC revolution, when it happened, it was a hardware limited problem. You had to wait until everybody bought a PC for their home. So there was a fairly long adoption curve. If you think about the commercialization of the internet, people will say, well, Eric, wasn't that purely digital? And the answer is we had to wait until broadband got rolled out to everybody's house. I remember, 14.4 modem in my house and how excited I was when I got a 56K modem, and how excited I was when I went to DSL. The entire reason Cyber Monday exists is because people couldn't shop online on their home connections. They waited until they went to work on Monday so that they could use the broadband at work to shop. So you look at a lot of the innovations that have happened, and they've been a distributed problem to solve. The cloud I think when cloud came in, there was this really thought of this was the leading innovation. that was there. I think now that AI is coming in, we're starting to realize the cloud was an enabling innovation, because by centralizing the problem, it's no longer just a distributed problem, it's a centralized problem that a few large players need to solve some problems, but they have the scale to do so. As opposed to every company's got to run their own AI infrastructure, which would have been extremely cumbersome, lengthy process to go figure out. I think this cycle is going to move very quickly. I think the opportunity field is very large. I think the fundamentals are very challenged in terms of people understanding how important data quality is in getting to good answers. As you think about companies, data governance, data stewardship, data lineage, these are all been important topics for years. They become absolutely mission critical when you're talking about how do you effectively train these models to start doing the rote tasks that you can free humans from so that they can work on higher order problems. And so ultimately, I think this is there's going to be a tremendous amount of innovation at the top. I think the trickle down into companies will be on this is the progress we have made in transforming our core to be ready to accept these innovations. Some companies are more ready, some companies are less ready. I think it is still a learning for the industry that says there's some really great opportunities out there where you can help your customers, you can help your employees, you can make people's lives better. But in order to do that, you got to do these 5 things first. And if you try to skip the line, take the fast pass, go straight to the end, you're going to stumble a lot. You're going to spend some money that you probably shouldn't. I think this is companies are going to have to learn how to do this, and they're going to have a relatively short window of time to do it.
And it strikes me there's a balancing act here, right? Because if we're waiting for everything to line up perfectly, we'll probably never get there. And you talk about data quality and data assets. When we talk to companies, that usually the first part of the conversation starts with questions about data quality, data assets, data organization, and usually starts with someone saying, you may have seen bad, but you haven't seen this bad, right? So everyone's got generally a very poor self-image of their data assets. Relatively speaking, of course, everyone's pretty similar. The fact is, there are exceptions to the rule, companies that have got in front of this, often younger companies, to be entirely fair, because they haven't had 20, 30, 40 years of legacy systems to have to deal with. And so to some extent, they have cleaner and more contemporary architectures. So on one hand, we need to fix these problems. We need to become much better at data governance. We need to become much better at data management. On the other hand, we can't let perfect be the enemy of good, right? We have to start making progress. So there's a balancing act to be struck here, trying to figure out one foot on the gas pedal, one foot on the brake. Is that a way to think about it?
Well, I think, again, it goes back to really understanding, what problem you're trying to solve and what are the requirements to go get it done. For a company, like Humana or other scaled organizations out there, the question is, can you go and get your data to, a high level of quality, accuracy, fidelity in a short period of time? And the answer is probably not. But the question is, can you do it for the 5 or 6 domains that are critical for the problems you're trying to solve in the next year or 2? And the answer is, well, that's much more achievable. The challenge, I think, that's out there is, when we were, doing things on-prem, when we were doing things at smaller scale, you were talking about millions of parameters, right? Now you're talking about billions, trillions. The question of how much data is now potentially in scope, right, really, I think, causes some of the challenge. So I think my guidance would be 1 foot on the gas, but stay in your lane and don't switch lanes until you're ready to.
That's a great note to end on. Eric, one of the things that struck me in our conversation is how optimistic you are, which I think is really refreshing. But I think both about the prospects for the healthcare industry, Humana in particular, but also the benefits we can achieve with technology in this accelerated pace. And I think that for someone, I think it's very easy in a position like yours, I know, to look at the totality of challenge and get weighed by it. But what really strikes me is how you're bringing that optimism, which I think is going to be, exactly what we all need, is that keep a focus on the potential and don't necessarily let the inevitable challenges get in the way of the mission, because that's too good an opportunity to pass up on, I think.
Well, I think number one, if we view our job as leaders, which is, essentially my job is to help my team be successful, full stop. Right? That's all I do. So, if I think about that as my charter, ultimately, in order to lead them effectively, we have to look at, well, where's the positive outcome? How do we lead to that? If we don't start with, we actually have a view of what we can do. I don't know how you lead a team successfully if you're focused on the challenges. You have to be focused on the opportunities. The other reason is, again, in doing this for as long as I have, the change in our environment, I think we take for granted. So many things that have been introduced in my adult life that have fundamentally transformed who we were, and how we do things. And frankly, we have forgotten many of the limitations that were in our life. Having to, if you're old enough, you bought a 20-foot telephone cord so you could actually walk around your house when you were on the phone. You had to tell people where you were going and when you expected to be home because they had no idea how to check up on you. If you needed directions once you were out, you had to stop and ask somebody because there was nothing else to do. I think it's hard not to be optimistic when
Yeah,
you
yeah.
look back and say, look at what has happened over the last 30 years. Yes, there's challenges. Yes, there's things that should have been done differently. I don't know how you don't sit there and say, there's much more opportunity in front of us than there are challenges.
That's a great way of thinking about it. Yeah, try telling my 24-year-old son about extension cords on phones. Um, so, Eric, thank you very much. It was a wonderful conversation. I appreciate it. And congratulations on the progress to date. And perhaps more importantly, good luck with the challenges going forward as Humana.
Absolutely appreciate it. I wouldn't be anywhere else.
Thanks for listening to the CX Iconoclast from OCX Cognition. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so you won't miss any of our thought-provoking conversations. And please get in touch if you want to learn more about what OCX Cognition's predictive CX analytics platform can do for your business by providing complete insights into every account, continuously updated and connected to operations. You'll find contact info in the show notes.